Hey folks, welcome to another edition of the Mental Health Podcast. I have Karan here with me, and I can't wait for you guys to hear for what he has to say. Hey Karan, how are things with you?
Hey Sanjay, yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on this conversation, and looking forward to it. Yeah.
All right. Karan, I think the first thing that I ask people to do is like talk a little bit about themselves, give themselves an elevator pitch. So
Hmm.
the floor is all yours. Take it away.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. So yeah, so I am a senior analyst at a healthcare organization right now. So
Mm-hmm.
I came here in the US in 2017 from my
Mm-hmm.
grad school,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm originally from India.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in the US for close to like 6 years now. I've worked with two different employers at this point,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I want to, understand, current considering the current job market. So what
Mhm,
has been
mhm.
your sort of experience around it? Can you share your experience?
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, I guess a lot of conversation that I had on platforms like LinkedIn was around my experience with the layoff in
Mm-hmm.
December last year.
Mm-hmm.
And with everything that has been going around with the economy, that was one of the, uh, although you expect a lot of these changes to happen around you, but when it happens to you, I think
Mm.
it's a very different experience and feeling. So,
Right.
and I started writing a lot about this on, LinkedIn, and sharing these thoughts because a lot of people were going through it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, yeah, it's like it's all the, I think it's like the 7 stages of grief,
Right.
and going through all of them in a very short span of time,
Right.
especially being an immigrant and being on a work visa. I think it just multiplies a lot in a very short term. So yeah, yeah, that was a difficult experience.
Definitely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that all immigrants who are on, an immigrant visa just have 60 days
Mhm.
to find a new role. And yeah, it is kind of tragic the way the system is set up today.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so I noticed you mentioned, the 7 stages of grief. For people who don't understand that, can you just explain that a little bit more in context? Uh, and sort of give your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I think, and I'll try to remember the best to my ability. I think it's like goes from shock,
Mm-hmm.
different kind of a denial and anger,
Mm-hmm.
and then goes through a cycle of having, and it depends a lot on, how depressed you are with everything that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
You accept it, and then you start processing that, situation. So, and all of these stages of grief are something that, people might end up having different thoughts. First, they might be able to accept it, but then you go back to thinking about, what happened. So it's
Right.
it's very different for everybody, is what I have seen, and having talked to a lot of people who have been in this job, situation
Mm-hmm.
in the market right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I discovered it through this experience, because I always knew that, of course, it will be a shock to me,
Mm-hmm.
but having these thoughts with, around how can this happen to me, I think
Right.
it's one of the biggest questions that people go through. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for mentioning that. And the other thing that you mentioned that was great was like this process isn't linear, and
Right.
it varies from individual to individual, and you could just be going through some cycles where you hit different stages, and you might end up in a stage where you thought you had already sort of passed by. And
Exactly. Yeah.
And in terms of like your own sort of mental health, can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about some of the resources that you have used and like how you sort of take care of your own mental health?
Yeah, so before the layoffs, and again, like it's a funny thing that the employer that I was laid off from, that was the first time I was introduced to a platform called Lyra, Lyra,
Mm-hmm.
where it was included like there were a certain number of sessions that were included through the year,
Mm-hmm.
and just out of curiosity, I think last year sometime I started I just booked a session, I liked it, and I started having those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest thing that I want to point out to everybody who's listening in is one of the biggest things that came out of it was a third person perspective. I know,
Right.
Sanjay, you have had these conversations with, all the guests that you have had
Right.
about how if I am reaching out to my spouse, maybe because we are talking every day, we might not have a different perspective on it.
Right.
And through those sessions, I came across this understanding that both me, my wife, and my family have been going through a lot, right? With
Mm-hmm.
COVID, not being able to travel,
Mm-hmm.
having a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
then shifting jobs and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. So yeah, there's a lot going on, which people around us might just be just like us.
Mm-hmm.
They are expecting things to happen, as something normal.
Right.
So yeah, I think that was the biggest takeaway. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, like I am sort of curious about Lyra Health as well. I haven't had an
Mhm.
opportunity to, take their platform in and, organize some sessions around it.
Yeah.
one of the things that I sort of find it hard these days is like you mentioned, understanding what platforms are available to me. So,
Mhm, mhm,
can you sort of as an employee or as an engineer, right? I mean, like, what are some
mhm.
of your expectations in terms of an employer setting up mental health resources for people as well? So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of these experiences are around like prioritizing this. And, I think one of the things that we have seen is like, your HSA, your HR benefits, like everything is kind of covered during these processes, but maybe sometimes, specifically mental health is not called out. I think
mm-hmm,
that's one of the things that even on platforms like LinkedIn,
mm-hmm,
I started posting the other side of this because we have to have more conversations around, something that can happen to someone near us can happen to us, right? So
right,
I think that prioritization needs to happen overall.
mm-hmm,
Again, especially post COVID and then the
mm-hmm.
job market right now. I think that's reason enough for us to kind of having that thought on top of our mind. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, COVID was a shock
Yeah.
for a lot of us and myself, considering seeing a lot of people close to us being impacted in such a obvious or
Mm.
a way in which we couldn't anticipate what was going to happen next. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that definitely had an impact in terms of my mental health as well. So,
Yeah.
I was curious. You mentioned, your spouse and
Mhm.
yourself sort of having to deal with this situation. I mean, I have engaged usually on an individual perspective, but can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about how that conversation sort of, or how you can normalize having these conversations with another person who's so close to you, and like how that has impacted you as well? So,
Yeah, 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 definitely. So one of the things that both of us noticed were like in our mind, we were kind of expecting to just cope up with these things without talking about it. So,
right.
like both of us know that, okay, we can't visit our home country right now. So, just having those discussions would bring out, maybe just arguments or something like that, which
Hmm.
which might not be like, as something that's pointed at each other, but it's just how things are right now, right?
Right,
So
definitely.
you gradually start having less and less of those discussions and start thinking that okay, we are supposed to just take care of all of this within ourselves. So I think that's one of the things, especially after we had our kid. I think it kind of crossed that line of like, now we have to talk more about it, because there's no way we are able to, I mean, I joke around with my wife, like both of us are the youngest ones in our house, and then we haven't taken care of a kid. So we were on our own, and then, just experimenting things. Of course, the doctors are helping, but,
Right.
we are on our own in that way. So we did a lot of that, and, hope, like I was lucky enough to have an employer at that point to, kind of having that flexibility, which is
Mm-hmm.
another great point where employers understand that, okay, this is a situation where I would need some time off every now and then
Right.
to take care of these things. So yeah, I think conversations is a very small word, but it's such a large impact. Right now we have these conversations every day about, what are the things around us which we are grateful for,
Right.
and then just two or three things, and then, we'll just sleep after that. So I think that's one of the things that I think we have liked doing that, because throughout the day it's just, like we are going through so much. Yeah.
Right. For sure. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for, talking about having those conversations and,
Mm.
not being able to sort of process it all, and people trying to deal with it by not talking about it, and
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
things need to be highlighted over and over again, because the less you talk about it, the more it sort of intensifies. so um
Exactly. Yeah.
so
Yep.
yeah, I mean, like, thank you for normalizing that. So the other aspect of it is one thing that I haven't brought up in the past, but I was wondering in terms of the cost perspective, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
How do you see mental health and the services that are available as of today? So.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. So I think the reason I tried it out with, one of my previous employers was because it was kind of like available for us. And I think a lot of individuals, I think, have these questions, but it's also on us to maybe have, reach out to these teams and inquire about, how these services work, whether the
Mm-hmm.
employers are supporting that or not. And on a very personal level, I mean, I'll be honest about it, that because, when I started my new position after the layoffs, there has been, again, like I'm into that, the circle of life where we are going through so many things. So I'm just in thinking in my mind about, okay, I'll just check tomorrow, maybe next week.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't gotten to that. So that's one of the things that, even while we are having these conversations, I'm understanding that, I should do that and
Mm-hmm.
prioritize it before, again, I fall into that cycle of not paying attention to it.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yes. I think one thing that I have observed as you transition to a new role, it is so overwhelming as well. And I want to get your take on like how that transition happened as well, like from working with a different set of people to,
Yeah.
transitioning to a new workforce. Like, what has been your experience around that as well? So.
Yeah, yeah, and it's my situation is also one of a kind, because I joined a previous employer with a
Mm-hmm.
different team.
Mm-hmm.
So right out of grad school, the employer that I worked with, and
Mm-hmm.
it was part of the, I think, networking opportunity for me, where I saw something on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I knew this manager from a previous conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
then reached out to him. So I
Mm-hmm.
was both lucky enough to have going back into an organization where I'm aware of like how the processes are. But
Mm-hmm.
as you said, like for somebody who is into a completely new structure, it would be a lot of especially coming after the 2 or 3 months of layoff time, or
Right.
even longer for a lot of people.
Right.
It's a lot, yeah. And I have highlighted that in my conversations early on about, I will take some time to kind of grasp all of this and things like that. So I ask people to be upfront with these conversations, because everybody is, busy with something on their end, and it's not their fault, right? Like it's something also, like I think that we should talk more about.
Right.
And yeah, again, like people would have to then, also understand that, yeah, this is something that people are going through right now.
Definitely. Yeah. So you brought up a few great points there. So one
Mhm.
of the thing was like understanding that you have gone through a period where you didn't work, and
Yes.
all of a sudden there is a radical shift where you have to sort of get working on your,
Yeah,
period of 8 hours or whatever that is. And
right.
that also sort of like, a networking and making sure that you're using your network to figure out if they can help you out in any way possible.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I mean, like the other aspect that I wanted to talk about was like, you said, you were impacted by the layoffs in December. So
Mhm.
how long did it take for you to sort of find your new role and like, uh,
Oh,
th-
yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
and what was that process like as well? So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And as you can I think understand, and everybody I think in the US market right now can understand, December is one of the times where everything is winding down.
Right.
So it was a definitely something that was a lot of work initially, because while I was understanding that people might not respond at this time, I still had to make that effort because I had a very short period of time.
Right.
And I also want to add that uh, luckily, my employer gave me some buffer time that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of companies do with work visa and extending their timelines.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an additional couple of months, which is a huge, I think, huge deal
Mm-hmm.
for everybody who is on a work visa. So I was lucky there to have that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think everything from December when I started out, I was able to start in March, sometime in mid March for my new role. So it was a huge, I think those 3 months, 3 to 4 months felt like an year, I think, on my end, where every day you want to go back to something. And when you are there, as we talked in the last question, when you are there, it's a change, right? And it's something that you have to deal with right away. So
Definitely.
yeah, yeah.
And one thing that I have seen other people in my own circle
Mhm,
sort of talk about is like once you get to the new role, there is
mhm.
a different kind of anxiety, and I
Um,
think I've noticed that wherein like people are wondering, oh, since what happened previously, is this
oh yeah,
something
yeah,
that
yeah.
is this something that is going to happen to me next as well. So I was just wondering, like, did you have any thoughts around this as well? So
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a good question, because before I go to my experience, I have seen posts from people who have been laid off twice within a year, right?
right,
So, and as and when people see these things happening, that's how we manifest it. Like the worst case scenario is what you manifest sometimes.
definitely,
So
definitely,
yeah, yeah, and I agree. Like, it's something that I would say, not every day, but every now and then when I read something about this happening,
right.
it's definitely something that crosses my mind.
Mm-hmm,
But again, I think it's part of that, like, last stages of acceptance, where both like me, my wife, and everybody from my family, when
mm-hmm,
we had these discussions about what if we have to go back,
mm-hmm,
and leave the country.
mm-hmm,
One thing that I think I told myself was that wherever we are, we'll probably
mm-hmm.
build something after that. Maybe
Right,
not this exact thing, but
right.
we may be able to build something smaller somewhere. So I think
Definitely,
that's one of the things that has happened, and I have tried telling myself that might be a defense mechanism, but
right.
I think that kind of works for me for now. Is that
Definitely,
I've added value, and
right.
not thinking about that there was a reason I was laid off because I was not adding value. I don't think
Definitely.
yeah, that's a good way of probably thinking about it. That's what I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Karan, for sharing that because, I think a lot of people lost confidence because,
Yeah.
they got impacted by the layoffs. And
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of people blaming themselves,
Yeah.
thinking that
Yeah.
they weren't doing something right. And that was the reason why they were impacted by the layoffs. And you mentioned a
Mm.
great point wherein like that belief or that final stage of acceptance saying that no
Mm.
matter where you have the capacity to build something, and it just believing in yourself and accepting uh, things as they are,
Yeah, yeah,
is such a great insight. Thank you for sharing that and highlighting that as well. So yeah,
yeah, yeah, definitely.
the conversation has been great. So, if there
Mhm.
are a few things that you want people to take away from this conversation, what would they be?
Yeah, and I think that would be, the highlight, I think, should be that, having that self-belief, as you mentioned, Sanjay. I think, uh, especially when we see so much happening around us,
Mm-hmm.
I think people should never blame themselves about what has happened. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
priority of the economy, of the organization,
Mm-hmm.
that has created that sort of an hierarchy. And
Mm-hmm.
understanding that cost, I think that's what I tell myself is like, cost at the end of the day will trump everything,
Mm-hmm.
because it's definitely about profits, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it has to be done. Maybe, even if we think about us as owners of some industry or things like that,
Mm-hmm.
it probably has to be done sometime
Right.
based on the economy. So I think thinking about that is one of the things that I wish everybody takes away from this conversation. Yeah.
Great, Karan. I mean, like, you've really sort of given people a lot to think about in terms of the layoffs and the current situation.
Sure. Yeah.
Here is hoping, more people get inspired and
Yeah.
they start working on something new as well. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
thank you.